Hey everyone, welcome back to Engelbart and another edition of Utterly Pointless Comparisons. Today I'll be taking a look at the arcade and Genesis versions of dataeast's classic run-and-gun shooter, Midnight Resistance. I'll go ahead and put the specs up on the screen so you can compare the hardware of the two versions while I talk about the game a little bit. Aruka. Midnight Resistance was originally released into the arcades by dataeast in 1989, and although it is a side-scrolling run-and-gun shooter along the lines of Konami's Contra, it's actually a follow-up to dataeast's own Heavy Barrel, which was an overhead run-and-gun shooter that was a little more like Ikari Warriors. Now, despite the difference in viewpoint, both Heavy Barrel and Midnight Resistance do share quite a few similarities. They both have a military theme, starring characters in fatigues with very large guns that can be powered up. They both feature usually large vehicular end bosses and doors that you have to blow open to proceed to the next level. They have rotary joysticks that allow you to shoot and move in independent directions, and they also feature enemies that sometimes when you kill them will drop keys that you can then use to unlock power-ups. Now, dataeast published the Mega Drive version of Midnight Resistance in 1991 in Japan. They also developed it with the help of a few other companies. When the game came to the US, it was published directly by Sega. And what an excellent conversion this is. And I'm not being facetious, it's really good. They did a great job of bringing the arcade experience home. But having said that, it is absolutely not perfect, and I will talk about some of the differences between the two games. First off, let's get this one out of the way. The arcade version of Midnight Resistance features 2-player simultaneous play, whereas the Genesis version is 1-player only.
Sad.
Now, as a consequence of that, they were also able to move a lot of the UI elements to the top of the screen and put them in their own little window, cleaning up the main gameplay area a bit, which is at least a minor plus. The arcade one also features slightly more, I would say, kinetic animation. It's a little bit faster and the character bobs up and down a bit. The Genesis version, he just kind of slides along, and even though the amount of frames is the same, it's slower and it just looks a little bit weird. In the arcade game, you can also see your secondary backpack weapon actually equipped on your character. In the Genesis version, you do not see this at all. And the finer, major visual difference between them is the Genesis version features an inexplicably dark color palette on a lot of scenes. It's really baffling as to why they made this decision, and completely unnecessary. In terms of gameplay, they really nailed it. This game plays very closely to the arcade version. dataeast included multiple control scheme options to make up for the fact that there is no rotary controller available on the Genesis. You have one control scheme where you basically just press a direction on the pad and that's the direction you shoot in, a la Contra, and there are also various other options that allow you to rotate your gun sort of like the arcade one. You'll probably find some control scheme that you can live with, even though none of them are perfect. Probably the most interesting point of comparison between these two games is in terms of sound. The music is unquestionably better in the Genesis port of this one. That's right. Not only does it sound better, it's also in stereo, whereas the arcade version is in mono. The Genesis version does shuffle around where certain songs are played, so do be aware of that, but all the songs except for one are present. When it comes to the sound effects, they're different in the two versions, but I don't think one stands head and shoulders above the other, so I think that's kind of a wash. Where the arcade version of Midnight Resistance gets a leg up is where it comes to voice samples. It features dedicated hardware for that, and has quite a few of them, whereas the Genesis version has exactly 0. I'm guessing this is probably due to cartridge size constraints, since the arcade one is a little bit over 2 megabytes, whereas the Genesis one is a little under 1 megabyte. And finally, a quick recording note. I did use save states at the start of each level, only to ensure that I could match up the gameplay as closely as possible while having to insert as few pauses as possible. And you may or may not have noticed, but I've started including some text commentary during the gameplay footage. The reason for that is I wanted to point some things out without interrupting the music or sound of the game. If you'd rather have voiceover commentary here, please let me know in the comments and I may change the way I do that in the future. And with that, sit back, relax, and enjoy complete playthroughs of both the arcade and Genesis versions of Midnight Resistance.
Pick a weapon. Fire! Nitro. Pick a weapon. Super power up. Pick a weapon. Homing missile. Power up. Three-way homing missile. Three-way. Pick a weapon. Power up. Pick a weapon.
Thank you, son.
Barrier.
Thank you. Thanks, bro.
Shower.
Thank you.
Shower.
Bless you.
Thanks for sticking around to the end. Now I have a bonus note about the game for you. You see that ending where everyone stares off happily into the sunset after a job well done? Well, that can go just a bit differently. You see, that locker at the end where you have to unlock and save each family member individually, if you don't have enough keys, you can't save them all. So anyone you don't save will not be present in that scene at the end, which will cause your character to wonder, what could he have done differently? How could he have saved little Johnny if only he'd gotten one more key? And this will eventually drive him to alcohol, and he'll become a drunk, but only before getting into hard drugs. Then he'll find himself on the street until one day he decides he can't live with the pain anymore and has to end it all. Or maybe he didn't like little Johnny that much and he just decides to go on with his life. And that brings us to the end of another video, my friends. Do you have any fun or fond memories of playing Midnight Resistance? Go ahead and share them with the world in the comments below. With that, I will say thanks for watching, and see me later.